All right, welcome. I want to talk about defensemen in terms of really offensive defensemen. I got five guys on the board. All of these guys are above a point per game. Honorable mention to Jamie Drysdale, who's only played 2 games, but also has 2 assists, so he's a point per game player. But we're going to talk about these five guys who've played at the very least a majority of the season. Fox and McCarr both dealing/dealt with injuries. I want to talk about this because if you're looking at just stats or you're just looking at analytics, and you're not able to actually follow these players throughout several games a year, it's really easy to mistake these players for being excellent defensive players as well, because that's just simply not the case. I do want to preface this by saying all of these players would destroy me in terms of defense. If I were to step on the ice, like, I'm not getting by any of these guys. To play defense at an NHL level is very difficult. Even guys like John Klingberg, who has horrible stats across the board, still is, okay at defense sometimes. So these guys are, I'm not like saying these guys are terrible or shouldn't be in the league or should be forwards. That's not what I'm saying. The league is changing, it's evolving. It's quicker, it's more skilled, it's faster, and it's more scoring oriented than it has been defense. We're having conversations about goaltenders and why aren't there as many good goaltenders as there used to be. And the answer is defense is kind of taking a backseat to offense. Depending on who you ask, like, that's fine. I'm definitely in the minority. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's, this is better for the game and so on. But I want to talk about these guys. Cale Makar, I got the Colorado jersey on because this is the argument I hear a lot. Quinn Hughes is up there too with second. Neither of these guys are elite, or I would even consider to be average in their own defensive zone when they have to play defense. Two of the most elite offensive defensemen in the league, and there's no doubt about that. Two very highly skilled players, two leaders on their team. I can't say enough good things about either of these guys. They're both, from what I can tell, great human beings. But I want to go through this list real quick. You'll notice a common theme. All these guys are power play quarterbacks. I didn't go through and pull up power play stats because at the end of the day, an assist is an assist. A goal is a goal. It is what it is. Shout out to Eric Carlson last year, who was like nearly a point per game at even strength, which is just insane. Like, on top of all the power play points he scored and helped produce. But just getting into some stats. Makar, 27 games played, 8 goals. He has 37 total points. He's currently at a 1.37 points per game. He's currently a plus 13. Quinn Hughes, 33 games played, 41 points is insane. Wow. So 1.24 points per game. He's a plus 25. Bouchard is a minus 7, 1.1 points per game. 28 games played, 8 goals, 32 points. So still pretty solid offensive production. Adam Fox, who's played 20 games so far, has 3 goals and 21 points. No plus or minus just yet. He's 1.05 points per game. That's usually where you expect to see Fox. He might increase his production a little more as the season progresses, but we'll see. Noah Dobson, right? 1.03 points per game. He's a plus 19. In 33 games, he has 5 goals and 33 points, which is great. Now, when I talk about defensive play, analytics and stats can both be misleading when it comes to defense playing their own zone, and analytics is supposed to try and take the team bias out of it, but in all honesty, it doesn't do a very good job at all. Actually, I think it is worse. Right? So I'm looking at purely deployment right now. That's this section. I know it's a little hard to read. I don't know why I had to write it so small. But before I get into that, I want to talk about kind of my observations versus maybe like someone who really doesn't care or really just looks at the stats or may not follow certain players throughout certain games. Um, Before I moved, which was like what a week ago, I had NHL Network. I would watch every goal, every highlight, and there were some I would pick out and really try to watch the full play or watch snippets from each game so I could see every goal and which defensive players are in position and out of position, who's chasing, who's not covering the point, making their defensive player look like they're out of position. And I do want to throw out that one of the biggest offenders are the top two on this board, and Bouchard. Bouchard is questionable in his own zone. I don't think that's too much of a debate, though. Right? We saw this argument with Tyson Barrie. I think he led the league, or he was close to leading the league in points per game, and didn't get a single Norris vote because he was the power play quarterback for Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. I think, Bouchard is okay. I like Bouchard. But I don't think anyone's really making an argument that he's great defensively. Whereas Makar and Hughes, you hear the argument all the time. They're very good in their own zone, too. It's simply not that true. Both of these players, they're both young. They'll both grow with the game and learn how to play defense as they age and get more experience in the league. We see that. It's not uncommon. And both of these players have continually progress in their own zone every single year. Especially Quinn Hughes. Shout out to Quinn Hughes. Last year's defensive play versus this year's it's a significant jump and increase in play. He's played a lot better in his own zone, but at the end of the day, it's still not great. It just isn't. It's one of those things. Both of these guys tend to chase quite often, which leaves their defensive partner exposed. We've seen it. We saw it a lot with Cale Makar early in the season. He'd be going up, chasing the puck to the wall or the blue line, and it's not his guy to be covering. It would often be like double coverage, and that could be a play scheme, but too often, Devon Taves, his defensive partner, was left with two offensive guys in front of the net. It was essentially a 2-on-1. Once the puck got to the front of the net, it was a 2-on-1 for Devon Taves, and he's a great defenseman. I think he's underrated offensively. He's a great two-way defenseman. I don't like the guy, just irrationally I don't like him, but he is fantastic. He's a great two-way defenseman. He skates, he can put up points, but he's very, very good and reliable in his own zone. So sometimes he'll make a save and try to prevent a goal against, but a lot of the highlights, especially early on in the season, I think it was a game they played the the Carolina Hurricanes, where Makar did it like 2 or 3 times in the same game, and it was just bad. And Devon Taves was left on an island, and it led to goals against. Right, but we also see that same thing from Quinn Hughes. The difference maker is both of these teams play in a very defensive-oriented and structured system. Obviously, Vancouver, number 1 in offense to this point. They have a lot of offensive talent, but Rick Tocchet, the coach that took over at the end of last year, very defensively oriented. Quinn Hughes also playing with Philip Hronek, whose game I thought was great last year in Detroit. He's found another level. He's not just getting assists and points, but his defensive play has been outstanding. And this is someone I don't really like the Canucks I don't like the Canucks. But you have a pairing of Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek together. That's a solid pairing. And in addition to a defensive first style of play, which is still being implemented. It's clear, but there's a lot more emphasis on defense now than there was when Bruce Boudreau was coach. And you're seeing this plus 25 as a result. You have a great offensive defenseman skating up into the zone, and you have those players. You have those centermen. Elias Pettersson, for example, is able to cover and play effective defense. If Quinn Hughes drives up into the zone and loses the puck, you have responsible players back there that can back you up, and that's helped Hughes a lot. But his play when it's in his own defensive zone is questionable. He's doing certain things great. He's not doing certain things great. It's the same thing with Cale Makar. The Colorado Avalanche, their forward group is fantastic at playing defense and team defense. And I'm just talking about these two because, again, these are the players you hear the most argument for. Like, they're very good defensively, they're very good in their own zone, when in reality, it's not really the case. For offensive defensemen, sure, they're okay. They're good. I'm not going to say either of these guys are two-way defensemen, which would mean they're reliable in their own zone. I'm not going to say they're both awful in their own zone, because every now and then they'll make plays. But the plus 13, plus 25 can be misleading if you're playing in a defensive-oriented system with a solid defensive partner that plays stay-at-home defense and can skate. That helps. Something else that I just slipped my mind, so I guess we'll talk about deployment. Deployment is important. Now, keep in mind, these are just stats I pulled from Money Puck. Offensive zone shift starts, right? So you get the other team gets an icing, you put your line on the ice. This is where you're starting your shift. Beginnings of periods, after goals, offsides. Whenever there's a line change and a face-off, that's where these numbers come in. So keep in mind for power plays, you're probably going to get a few more offensive zone draws throughout the game if you are the power play quarterback. That's it. Speaking of power play, I want to talk about shorthanded time. You will see some of these guys do play shorthanded time, and that is fine. That is great. In Colorado's case, Makar plays with Devon Taves for a couple reasons. A, chemistry. B, Devon Taves is debatably one of your better defensive defensemen. He's not a defensive defenseman, but one of your better defensive players. You have other options as well, but playing on a penalty kill is very systematic. You play to a system, you know your role, you know your position, you practice it. It's very different playing in a shorthanded role than it is playing 5-on-5 defense. It's very different. The roles, responsibilities are a lot more rigid in shorthanded play, whereas 5-on-5 play, things can be a little more fluid as plays develop. And that's why most offensive 5-on-5 zone time situations can look very different, whereas a lot of shorthanded play looks similar. There are different systems all over, and there are different coaches that like different systems and different matchups that warrant different type of shorthanded play, but at the same time, playing shorthanded isn't an indicator that a certain player is excellent on defense, because it may or may not be true. However, yeah, we'll get to that. All right, offensive zone time. Cale Makar, 22.8% of his shifts start in the offensive zone. Keep in mind, most of these guys are beginning shifts on the fly. Fluid line changes, plays ongoing. Players are coming off, going onto the ice. It's true for every defenseman in the league. But offensive zone time for Cale Makar to start a shift is nearly a quarter of his shifts, which is a lot. It's literally the highest on this board, versus the lowest on the team, who's played a substantial number of games, being Jack Johnson, 3.5%. Just to put in a little perspective, that's how you effectively deploy an offensive defenseman. And you'll see a theme here. Getting on to Quinn Hughes, 18.3 of his shift starts were in the offensive zone. All these guys are the team leader in their offensive zone percentage for their team. He was also the last player on his team in terms of percentage to start a shift in his own defensive zone of every player that's ever played defense on this team, on the Vancouver Canucks this year. Which you can look at it as a positive, you can look at it as a negative. I like to look at it as a positive. It's not just great for your offensive production, but it also shows that your coach is pretty in tune with your players, their style of play, and how to appropriately deploy their players. That is huge, and those are the little things that a lot of coaches actually don't get right. I don't want to say a lot, but there are definitely coaches that don't necessarily get deployment right. But Rick Tocchet and Jared Bednar in Colorado both deploy their players very well, and you got to give them credit for that. There's no doubt about that. Where are we going? Ian Cole, offensive zone draws, 5.2%, in contrast to the 18.3 by Quinn Hughes. Just to show a little perspective there, we're on to Evan Bouchard of the Edmonton Oilers, 22.3% in the offensive zone to start a shift, team leader. Cody Ceci was the lowest with 9.5. The Oilers, I had questions about deployment. That's, it is what it is. Offensive player deployment under Jay Woodcroft was fine, but when it came to defensive player deployment, I had questions. I have questions about Woodcroft's ability to coach defense. I'm not saying he was handed a great deck over in Edmonton in terms of his defense and goaltending, because he absolutely was not. And that is 100% not on Jay Woodcroft. But just purely based on analyzing defensive players, I think there were definitely some questions I had with his coaching in terms of defense. His offensive coaching, outstanding. You want to score goals, Jay Woodcroft is your coach. But you want to play defense, I have some reservations about that. But younger, newer coach, he'll get another chance. He can grow. We'll see what happens. He also fits the direction in which the league is growing. But Bouchard, he was second to last in defensive zone starting shifts, only behind Kulak, but it was really close. They were pretty similar in defensive zone shifts started. For last place, Adam Fox, where are we? Offensive zone, 18%. Everybody else on the team was between 6.1% and 11.3%. That shows you that Adam Fox is taking a lot of offensive draws, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the team. He also had 12.4% for defense, and there were some players on that team that were in the 20% for defensive draws, which again speaks to deployment. And Peter Laviolette over in the New York Rangers organization as the head coach, very good at player deployment. He always has been, and it's nice to see that at least Fox is getting some defensive draws. I don't think he's the worst defensively on his team, but with the chemistry he has with Ryan Lindgren, and Lindgren as good as he is defensively, you're going to get defensive zone draws out of that. Last up, Noah Dobson, offensive zone time, 14.1%, by far the lowest on this board. Sebastian Aho, the defenseman in the New York Islanders organization, 13.7% offensive zone draws. This was the only team where it was close in regards to offensive zone draws. And Aho, I think he has like 4 assists on the year or something. Actually, got stats right here. 4 assists, 4 points on the year in 24 games played, right? So we're not talking about a very offensive player there, at least in terms of production. I haven't dove into that too much, but Dobson also 11.5% of his start shifts were in the D zone. So Pellick was obviously number one, and with 21.4%, Polak was like 18 point something percent. But for the most part, Dobson, I'd say, is a pretty good player in terms of offense and defense. He's definitely, I would consider him the best two-way defenseman on the board. Now, I'm talking about defensive play as well. So I kind of just wanted to cover that, just dive in. This is scratching the surface. There's so much to talk to about offensive defensemen, and it's a lot of it's subjective. And I'm someone who really doesn't think analytics, analytical stats, or just conventional hockey stats really do it justice. With these types of players, the eyeball test is very important. You have to see what these players are doing, where they are, where they're out of position, because there's no doubt all of these guys are fantastic in the offensive zone, fantastic power play quarterbacks. Every single one is applicable to each one of these guys. Even Evan Bouchard, who I know gets a lot of hate. But at the same time, you can score 30 goals, you could score 30 points, and you have a pretty good support system around you. You only give up 14. You're gonna have a plus 16 at the end of the day. Again, two of the most potent offenses, two defensive structured systems right here. Evan Bouchard, Not the best defensive system up in Edmonton still. Adam Fox, I don't really know. They do play decent defense over in New York, especially with Laviolette. And Dobson in an extremely defensive system at a plus 19 on a team that doesn't score nearly as many goals as either Colorado or Vancouver is highly impressive. So let me know what you guys think. These are I just picked these guys because they were at or above a point per game. There's plenty of examples you can use. Almost every team has a good example of that. It just, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. Obviously, I know I've reiterated this, but this is also why I don't watch every single hockey game or every single team on any given night. I like to pick and choose my games. I like to take sample sizes from teams, and I like to look for certain things whenever I watch a game. And with Colorado's case, it's usually Makar and Taves. Everybody else in terms of defensive core is pretty easy to read. Bowen Byram, very offensive guy. Manson, very good defensive defenseman. Jack Johnson is a defensive defenseman. Good is subjective when it comes to Jack Johnson, but he's definitely not terrible, and it seems to work in Colorado. Right, so there are always certain guys I'm looking for and following every time they get on the ice and following them all around the ice and seeing what they're doing and if they're in position. Also looking at highlights, making sure players are in the position and out of position players. Did that lead to the goal against, or did that lead to a turnover, which led to a goal against, which consequently made the player out of position because that's where they made the turnover. Because everybody on the ice during 5-on-5 gets a minus. Everybody 5-on-5 during a goal scored gets a plus. It's not just one or two players, not just the players that were out of position. So it's just something I look at, and it's really easy to miss if you're only looking at stats or you're not able to pay attention to specific players. So there's no shame in that. But, it's like I can't go like a day without hearing how great Quinn Hughes or Makar are defensively. Yes, they're both much better than they have been in previous years. So that's great. You'll always want to work on your game, and these players, no doubt, do that year in and year out, not just offensively but defensively as well. But to call them some of the best defensive players in the game is a question, and especially when it comes to playing defense. Offensively, yes. Defense, I'd say no. I think there are a lot better options if you want solid defensive play, or if you just want more of a two-way defenseman. I think there are other options as well that would suffice. So obviously, let me know what you think. If you follow a team, who's your offensive defenseman? Do you have an offensive defenseman? Do you think they play good defense? Do you think they're more of a two-way defenseman? We can talk about this more if you'd like. If not, that's okay too. I can dive into this further if you really want. I use Money Puck for the analytics. I use NHL.com for regular stats. 5-on-5 goals versus power play goals, or points. 5-on-5 points versus power play points is also something to look at. How many of Quinn Hughes' 41 points are generated on the power play? If it's like 30, then his 5-on-5 play can be a little questionable. But then at the same time, that plus 25 speaks more volumes than it would, right? Because if he only gets 9 points during 5-on-5 plays, well, there's another, 16 goals that were scored while he was on the ice, more than the other team scored while he was on the ice. And this dude logs minutes. Also, I really want to give a shout out to Philip Hronek. I love that dude. I think he's played outstanding. I think him and Quinn Hughes, perfect partners. I got to give him credit. I think he's like 0.84 or something points per game, which is fantastic. Really big shout out to Hronek. Also, little last wrap up. I don't hate any of these players. In fact, I like a lot of these players. I think these players all of them are very hard to hate or even dislike. I just kind of wanted to settle the what are we doing? Like, who's better defensively? Who's not as good defensively? And just talk about that. But no hate or shade to any of these players. Always going to throw shade to Vancouver because I'm a Bruins fan. But also like pretty dedicated fan base over there. I hope you guys make the playoffs, but I also hope you lose. So there's that. New York Rangers. Yeah, that's a team. All right, that's it. I'm just rambling. Thank you guys for watching. Take care, right?